Thank you. If anyone wants to fight me on the burger sandwich conundrum, I will be available just outside. I can pack a punch. I know I look small, but I'm pretty spry. Alrighty, so one does not simply rebuild a product. M.A. Jackson said it takes 3 times as long as you'd expect to rewrite a system. And a colleague of mine at Culture Amp kindly said, a rebuild is never finished, only started. Thank you. Culture Amp is an employee experience platform that it does a whole bunch of things that are not relevant to this talk, but I specifically work on the performance product, which helps organizations to build high-performing teams that eventually drive better outcomes for the business. This performance product is 9 years old and was acquired into Culture Amp 5 years ago in 2019 via a Series A purchase. It was really small at the time, but since then we've grown it to about 2,700 customers. And on average, these customers launch about 850 performance review cycles during a low period to about 1,500 performance review cycles during peak periods. So I'm not bragging. These are not bragging numbers. I'm just trying to give you a sense that it's not a huge scale at the moment, and it's not a huge number of customers, but it's pretty decent. Our largest performance review cycle usually has about 40,000 employees, so that kind of gives you a sense for how serious we're talking. However, the overall global potential performance market is a whopping $3 billion. So this is where we would like to go. We want to build a performance product that can lead this global $3 billion massive market. Up until last year, there were many compounding, layered technical obstacles that were preventing us from being able to build that market-leading performance product. So the Series A product we acquired served us really well in 2019. It got us a foothold into the market, but it's no longer able to serve us to where we need to go next, towards a product that can lead a $3 billion market. This product contains 2 monoliths. There's a front-end monolith and a back-end monolith. The underlying domain model, data model, backend models, and architecture are all super outdated now. They were all set up really well in 9 years ago. I can't do the maths. The mind boggles. But for today's needs, the customer's needs have evolved, and it doesn't really fit those needs anymore. There are also a bunch of other modules cohabitating, very pleasant word, living in the same shared monoliths with our core performance models. So things like one-on-ones and goals, which are adjacent products. It's also home to a bunch of common shared concerns that would be stuff like authorization, authentication, emails, notifications, tasks, what you might call platform concerns or shared services. These are all living in the same monolith. It's getting really crowded now. It has a bunch of back-end and front-end tech debt and cruft from trying to purchase and aggressively scale and iterate the product when it was purchased. And then finally, it contains a lot of early-stage decisions. They were really sensible decisions when this startup was building this product, but at the moment, or let's say last year in 2023, these decisions were not serving us well anymore. There were also 8 teams trying to work in just these 2 monoliths with all these people living inside those monoliths. There was terrible domain separation. So these teams were stepping on each other's toes all the time. Teams would do a whole bunch of discovery, and they would spend weeks starting the implementation of a feature, only to find, after investing all this time, that they have suddenly collided with another team working in what was seemingly a completely different part of the code base. But because there was so much tight coupling, they could never have predicted that they would collide in this way. And suddenly, they're grinding to a halt, and they can't launch this feature anymore. There was also lack of ownership, because you can imagine from all this coupling, it's really hard to have ownership over a specific domain. And we didn't benefit from any shared tooling or infrastructure that was available at Culture Amp, because it was not fit for this product that was acquired. It was not built fit for purpose, tailored to this product. So this all adds up to a fearful engineering culture, teams that are working too slowly, that don't have any pride in their work, and are just not engaged. Basically, I'm describing the opposite of a high-performance culture. Clicky is not working. Meanwhile, while we are faffing about dealing with all these challenges, our customers are frustrated and sick of waiting, because we've ground to a halt. They are waiting for us to innovate. In some cases, they're waiting for us to just meet the basic needs, and we're not doing that. To cut a long story short, we were in a hole, a very, very deep hole that maybe looks familiar to some of you. So that's why I'm here. My name is Prakriti. I'm a director of engineering, and I'm here to talk to you today about our journey of trying to climb out of this very deep hole via a rebuild. So I'll walk you through these steps of a full rebuild, and I'll stop at each step and share some key reflections. And I'm hoping that this will make you feel less alone the next time that you're in a deep hole, which is going to happen. So the first step in this journey is like getting to the point that we even know that we need to rebuild. Like, how did we know that? Before any talk of rebuilding, we first tried everything else that was in our control. So it started with a lot of noise about enormous tech debt. There's so much tech debt. That's all I would hear when I joined Culture Amp. There's so much tech debt. But this tech debt didn't have any name. It didn't have any classification. It was not understood by our stakeholders. The cost that it was exacting from our teams was not appreciated by anyone except the poor, unfortunate sods working on those teams. So we started by showing instead of telling. We identified every last bit of tech debt that we could find in both the front end and the back end monoliths. We gave it a name, we gave it a classification, and sort of an impact rating. We empowered our senior leadership and our exec to talk about it, including our cross-functional partners in product and design. We then prioritized it bit by bit, chipping away at it slowly. We did all the effort, value, matrix, whatever things, estimations, and we chipped away. But it was taking really long, as it does. So we realized that, look, it's going to take forever. Even if we fix all the tech debt, think back to the radar of problems I showed before. It's not going to get rid of the other things in that radar. It's not going to fix our underlying domain model that's super outdated. And we still won't be able to get to that market-leading product, $3 billion. So next, we tried a piecemeal re-architecture. So within the monoliths, we identified a domain that we could re-architect in place while keeping the rest of the monolith around it completely functional. That was actually a surprisingly good plan. It was going really well. The problem is that it was too slow. We realized that if we do one domain at a time like that, by the time we finish, the market's going to move on and we will have been left behind. So in parallel with re-architecting, we thought, let's try extracting things out of the monoliths. This was hard. Like, we knew we had to break up the monoliths, but everything was so deeply intertwined inside them. There were no patterns at Culture Amp for doing this at the time. There were no quick foundations for setting up new services or like shared tooling, press a button, get a service running. None of that existed. And we had no solution for all the common shared concerns. Authentication, authorization, how do you get account data? How do you get employee data? How do you send an email? How do you send a notification? No shared solutions that we could adopt quickly. Still, we wanted to do it because it kept getting put into the too hard bucket, and we thought we were going to give it a good go. So we set up a Tiger team, put them aside, separate from the product teams, and gave them an example domain, asked them to extract it. They did a really good job. I actually can't believe they succeeded, but they extracted it. They wrote some documentation that other domain teams could follow to extract their domains as well. Unfortunately, doing all that helped us to realize the reality, which is none of these approaches are going to get us out of the hole at the speed that we need in time to lead the market. Like, we could have followed any of those or a combination of them, but by the time we had finished, all our competitors would have left us far, far behind. So we needed a really big reset. We needed to burn it down to the ground and start over from scratch. That's how we knew that we had to do a rebuild. Now, as I said, I'll share a few key reflections at every step. So things that went well for us during this first step. That amorphous statement of like, oh no, we have too much tech debt, that turned into a clear breakdown with prioritization, estimation levels for every single major tech debt item. That then allowed us to create visibility of the tech debt across layers outside of the performance product. So this built not only empathy, but also like awareness and understanding. We were then able to use that working cross-functionally. So even if I wasn't present in a room to advocate for it personally, or there was no representation from engineering present, our product and our design partners were still able to speak to the tech debt concerns in various rooms. So we were able to get that spread across Culture Amp. And then finally, trying everything else possible before suggesting the rebuild, and doing that with a really high level of transparency as we went through, meant that when it came time to finally saying, hey, we need to rebuild this, people were a lot more receptive to hearing that really difficult message that, yeah, we need to try over from scratch, because they really have tried everything else. Things that didn't go well that I've learned for next time. So suggest it sooner. This is a really tough one. How soon is the right time frame? I don't know. If you suggest it too early, we should do a rebuild, then everyone's going to say, oh, engineers are just being engineers. They love greenfield projects. They want everything to be beautiful and perfect. They love starting over from scratch. They only want to do refactoring. They only want to work on tech debt. All statements that I heard, by the way. I'm not making this up. So you can't do it too soon. But if you leave it too late, then you've wasted all this time iterating, chipping away on the tech debt, trying to fix your domain model. In that time, you could have maybe just rebuilt the entire product from scratch. So how do you find that perfect timing? Maybe I should have brought it up a bit sooner. That's my learning. The second one is establish trust and then seek forgiveness rather than permission. So we did a lot of the groundwork without asking for explicit permission and just working with a high degree of transparency. Come on, clicky. Now that we knew what had to be done, it was time to get buy-in. So the team, we were convinced that we need a rebuild, but we need money and people and resources. So we had to get buy-in from everybody else. That meant the teams who were actually going to work on the rebuild, cross-functional leaders in product and design, buy-in from senior leadership, so that's like other directors of other products and VPs of engineering, VPs of product, and then finally buy-in from the exec and from the board as well, because this was going to be a pretty expensive piece of work for CultureAmp. To get buy-in, you first need to know where the product is going to go. This is a radar showing potential opportunities that will be unlocked after we can do the rebuild. This is sort of like the promise of the wonderful world that will come after a rebuild. It contains opportunities that are physically impossible to do in the current product. Generating this list was key to explaining the need or validating the need for the rebuild. Then we started with some blue sky architecture brainstorming. We got a whole bunch of engineers in a room and we said to them, hey, imagine there are no constraints. So learning everything you've learned from the previous experiences and knowing this radar of opportunities, knowing where we want to go in the future, and knowing how the current product works and what its challenges are, if you had a blank slate, how would you design the architecture? A lot of brainstorming, many, many sessions. This is just to show you that there were lots of varied ideas that came out of those exercises. Now, a smaller group then took all these ideas and tried to converge it into a potential architecture for our new rebuilt product. After everything would be done, what would it look like? The idea here was not to decide the architecture down to the last detail. The idea here was more to see, it was a creative exercise. If you could have your ideal architecture, how different would it look from the product that we are stuck with, the architecture that we're living with today? If it's going to look vastly different from the current architecture, that makes the case for the rebuild pretty strong. If it's going to look very similar, then maybe you shouldn't rebuild. Maybe you should try and iterate on the existing product. Spoilers, in our case, it looked vastly different. That's why I'm here. So this was kind of like a first sketch. No one was going to hold anyone to any architecture decisions made here. It was just sort of like a bar, paper, napkin stage. So building that product radar of opportunities and doing these exercises enabled us to get buy-in from the team that was going to do this work. We involved product and design all the way through from day one, so we got buy-in from product and design as well. We kept senior leadership really close to this work, so that was kind of working on getting their buy-in. The previous things that we had tried before the rebuild, so the piecemeal re-architecture, working on the tech debt, extracting from the monoliths, those also were helping to get senior leadership buy-in. To get exec buy-in, we had to do a few more things. Those execs ain't easy. So first, we consulted a trusted external advisor. This is someone who has successfully completed a rebuild several times, but maybe more importantly, they have actually seen rebuilds fail several times, so they could talk us through the various failure modes. Finally, armed with all of this input, we prepared an exec presentation that told the holistic story of the Perform product. This last step is probably what got us through that final 20% hurdle to getting exec buy-in. The thing is that we were asking for approval to completely hit pause on the core performance offering for at least a year, maybe a bit longer. But it couldn't mean that our customers would see absolutely no new value for a year or longer. That was impossible. So instead, we proposed that while we are rebuilding a first slice, the rest of the performance offering can continue to ship the most critical, stop the bleeding kind of work that we really needed to do to retain our customers. That is what helped us get exec buy-in. When I heard one of the board members summarizing the situation by saying, "It sounds like you're asymptoting to grinding to a halt with an unhappy team," I was like, yeah, this guy gets it. I feel like buy-in is probably coming. So things we did well in this step. Talking to a neutral external advisor who has a lot of experience brought credibility to our plan and validated the need for a rebuild. Then one of our product VPs did a really good job stitching together that sort of holistic narrative, putting everything together we said, and explaining the entire puzzle. And rebuild is just a part of the performance puzzle. It's not the entire puzzle. So diverting the conversation more towards the customer rather than focusing it just on engineering pain. We took the time to work out loud with our stakeholders, being deliberate about who needs to be included in every single conversation, so that by the time we made the final ask, it didn't come as a big surprise to them. Instead, they had been coming on the journey, they were already kind of invested, and now they kind of wanted it as much as we wanted it by the time we got to that point of asking permission. And then slowing down at this step really helped us to go much faster later. Unfortunately, the slowing down cost us as well. We kind of worked in the shadows and behind the radar, under the radar, I mixed up my metaphors, outside of the usual forums for longer than we intended, which meant that there was a lot of uncertainty in the engineers who were working on the existing performance roadmap. Like, they knew something was going on, they knew that we might be doing a rebuild. It made them feel really anxious about the work that they were doing presently, like what's the future of this work? So I wish we could have either worked openly a bit more or wrapped up the shadowy bits a bit faster. And then I wish I had created a bit more space for active debate on the technical choices. I feel like we failed to get true buy-in on the technical choices early, and that meant that after a few weeks of work and after a bunch of code had already been written, we pivoted away. I should hide when I say this. We pivoted away from Hanami to Rails. Please don't hurt me. But we did, we had to. And that actually shaved a few years of my lifespan because it shook the confidence in a pretty big bet. So we had buy-in now, but this was still a very big, risky ask. We proposed that we're going to pick up just one slice, we're going to rebuild it, and we're going to take it all the way to our customers. Once all customers are migrated onto it, then we will rebuild the rest of the product. So that was like validation, right? We needed to use the first slice to validate our technology choices, our new domain model, our architecture, and our ability to actually do this in a time frame that's not going to kick us out of that market. That was an immense amount of pressure, very high visibility. It was a big bet, not just for the perform teams, but pretty much for all of Culture Amp. So we knew that if this first slice goes sideways, we may risk losing the rest of the initiative. That buy-in was going to go away if we fucked it up. There were also engineers who had worked on all the previous things I described, the tech debt and the piecemeal re-architecture and the monolith extraction. And this pivot felt like a sense of loss for those engineers because they had invested so much in those approaches. And then we said, hey, sorry, we're just going to burn this whole thing down to the ground. So I guess what I'm saying is there was a lot riding on the kickoff and on the first slice, and we had to make sure we kicked off really strong. No pressure, but a lot of pressure. So to set up the first slice up to succeed, we thought, let's set some goals, because that's how it works, right? You set up goals, and then everything is successful. We love setting goals. On the product side, we wanted to deliver a domain model that would take us into the future, that we could iterate on, an architecture that we could grow, and clear ownership for the teams during the rebuild as well as after the rebuild was over. But then we were like, this is easy peasy, sounds chill. We like to live dangerously. So we said, hey, we're not just going to rebuild the product. Remember when I shared earlier all the challenges that the teams were facing at the time? We said, fuck it, let's also rebuild the entire camp. So camp is what we call our groups of teams. So we decided we're going to rebuild the whole product. At the same time, we want fast-moving teams. We want them to have a strong engineering culture, amazing ways of working, really high engagement, lots of learning, growth, and development opportunities. The product's going to be beautiful. The camp's going to be beautiful. Everyone's going to be really successful. Fucking madness. So we laid out some ground rules or principles for how we were going to go about this rebuild. The first one we called like for like. That's sort of our catchy tagline for communicating that this is primarily a technical rebuild. So we are not going to just redesign the entire user experience. We're not going to add a whole bunch of features. We're going to take the existing product, and we're going to stand it up over here on a future-ready domain model and architecture, and we're going to do that first before we do anything else. It's going to use the latest and greatest foundations and the tooling that CultureAmp has to offer. We would proactively maybe end of life some shit that we didn't need over there. We would use the design system wherever we could. We would make our product more accessible. We would live up to the high engineering standards, but that was it. We were not going to just make it shiny and beautiful and add a lot of features. That was for two main reasons. So the first reason was we don't want this rebuild to last forever, for obvious reasons. Trying to redesign the entire customer experience while also rewriting every single line of code, building a brand new domain model, putting it on a brand new architecture, this is a recipe for disaster. It would have been a never-ending project. We did not want a rebuild that drags on with a long tail for 5 years, and we didn't want continuously changing goalposts about what this new product should look like, what is its strategy, what is its vision, why are we even here, there is no spoon. We didn't want to get into all of that. The second reason was we wanted to reduce customer risk. Our next principle was that we would freeze the entire core performance part of both the front-end and back-end monoliths as soon as the first slice is delivered. So we'll ship the first slice to production, we'll get all customers on the first slice, and that's it. The old product is now frozen. We did that because we didn't want the old and new products to potentially drift in different directions. We also never wanted any communication back from the new product to the old product, and we did never want to be in a situation where some customers are on the old and some customers are on the new, except for maybe an early access program. So we were going to decommission as we go. Part of the definition of done. And then finally, we resolved to be deliberate in every step we take. So we are taking the time to set high engineering standards, investing in building high-performing teams as we go. Now, the total scope of the rebuild, the core performance, as we call it, contains 6 slices. You don't care what the slices are, so I'm not going to go into it. I'll just tell you that for the first slice, which was super, super high stakes, we picked what we call self-reflections. So we chose this one for a few good reasons. It's well used by customers, strong attribute of a good first slice. We wanted real customer traffic so that we could validate all the choices that we were making. Secondly, self-reflections was in the worst shape of all 6. It hadn't been touched in the longest. It was the neglected baby of performance. It was also relatively isolated from the other units, which meant that we could take a team and put it on self-reflections. They could get high focus, and the other teams could continue, like I said, doing the most critical, stop-the-bleeding kind of work before we froze everybody and put all the teams onto the rebuild. That was really key to getting the buy-in. It was that last 20% to getting the buy-in. And if we couldn't have promised that, we couldn't have just stopped and started rebuilding immediately. And then finally, it had just the right amount of complexity. So we wanted some difficulty, but we didn't want the most challenging piece for the first slice. We felt like if we could do this one, then it would be a fair representation to say, yeah, we can probably do all the others. Then we took a few targeted steps to set up this first slice for success. I'm highlighting these steps because I feel like they don't make sense for all kinds of initiatives. Like, they make sense for the rebuild, but some of these steps I think are just stupid for other kinds of projects. So don't just take it blindly and apply it to all projects. First, we set up a Goldilocks timeframe commitment. Long enough that we can do it really well with cross-functional partnership with product and design, but not so long that we just talk endlessly about what's right. It needs to be tight enough to force us to make the right trade-offs and to move quickly, rather than trying to rebuild everything perfectly and beautifully. Then we started with a small A team of sorts. We brought in a mix of our strongest performers, domain knowledge, subject matter experts, embedded knowledge of adjacent things like the design system, front-end tooling, back-end tooling, by bringing in people from other parts of the organization. Am I revealing my age with this GIF? I think I am. Mental note, change for next time. I was going to go with the A team, but then I was like, that's even older than Captain Planet, so let's not do that. We took a firm stance that we were going to adopt all company metrics and standards wherever they existed. If a standard didn't exist yet because of maybe varying maturity levels, like accessibility, for example, then we would hold ourselves to our own internal standards and try to build it the best way that we know how. And finally, we needed an internal PR campaign. not just to get people on board, but to kind of get them excited. Like, this was hard. It was going to be high pressure, and we didn't want them to feel intimidated by this project or feel like it was too ambitious. So we needed to get people going. Most of that worked, and we actually managed to ship the first slice. Real footage of how I looked when it was finished. Overall, I would say that it went really well. Now, we didn't ship anywhere close to the initial finger-in-the-air target that had been set for the team, but we did ship very close to the first estimate that was actually communicated by the team who was working on it. I'll share how we measured success in the next step. We scaled up slowly, rolled out to riskier and larger customers, built for scale as we went, had very few incidents, few bugs, no major customer surprises. All in all, I would call that a resounding success. So this was the most crucial step in the journey, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on this slide. There's a lot to highlight here, and I think all the key reflections are really on this step. That doesn't mean you can stop listening to the talk, by the way, after this step is over. I shouldn't have said that so soon. The next step is super important, I promise. She lies. So most of what I said in the previous slides around like the goals, the principles that we set up, and how we set this team up for success, the Goldilocks commitment, the PR campaign, all that is part of what worked well. A few more lessons on top of that. So we set up a clear decision-making framework to help us move fast. This helped us know who is the decision maker, what is the decision that they're going to make, who do they need to consult based on the level of the decision that was being made, and what is our engagement model with our key leadership stakeholders. This was essential because it saved the team from being blocked constantly by the availability and schedules of other people. Everyone wanted to be involved. This was a really high-stakes project. So how do you keep the team moving quickly? We didn't want the team stopping to seek approval for every single decision, and we didn't want too many cooks in the kitchen all the time. This one thing itself is actually worth an entire conference talk. So if you want to hear more about this, let me know. We then had a lot of firm trade-off conversations, and we protected the scope of our EAP aggressively. We made bold choices based on those trade-offs. The Goldilocks timeline kind of forced us to think about those trade-offs, to avoid gold plating, to be really serious on like what is good enough and what do we need to ship to our customers at what time. We got clear prioritization from our exec and leadership team. So they took all the major initiatives that were in progress at CultureAmp at the time, and they created this massive prioritized stack-ranked list. It had 25 initiatives in the list, and this one got put at number 1 in the list. That was huge. It helped us to get airtime and priority in other teams' roadmaps who we would need because they were dependent teams. This project ended up having 18 dependencies outside Perform for the first slice. So if we hadn't been number 1 in the stack rank, those 18 dependencies would have really struggled to prioritize us because they would have other priorities that they needed to deliver as well. Finally, we invested time early in building a new domain model, not just for the first slice, but for the entire rebuild, looking holistically at the future opportunities that we needed to deliver to. We did this cross-functionally as well, including a few key leadership stakeholders. Now, this was kind of a bit brutal, the first slice, so there's also a rough ride, lots of lessons from what didn't go well for us. That initial finger-in-the-air estimate, combined with like the high visibility, high pressure, everyone wants to know what's going on with this project, it led to the team feeling quite stressed. Little pressure cooker got created inside that team, and they started to burn out. Establishing momentum was a real struggle for them. Because remember, the A team, we like brought all these people together. Some of them were total strangers to each other. We gave them no time to plan. We put them in a room, and we said, start executing right away. So initially, they were not able to invest time at the right stage of the project, prioritizing, estimating, refinement, planning, and doing that sort of thinking work. But they did do it eventually, but by then they had kind of lost momentum and lost engagement a little bit. And then finally, we learned a lot of lessons around dependency management. This is the biggest cross-camp initiative that CultureAmp has ever done. We did not have a mature model for how to manage dependencies to that degree, and a sort of cross-camp initiative that involved every camp at CultureAmp. We have one now, though, so that's good. Step 4, measuring success. So this rebuild was like for like, as I said, which means that it's not going to look that different to the customer. So it was hard to measure success. We couldn't do it in the usual ways that revolve around like setting hypotheses, validating hypotheses, product analytics, revenue, customer adoption. All the cool stuff that helps you measure success in your projects was not applicable to us. But we couldn't not measure anything. How would we know that we had shipped something better? So we had to define what metrics were important to measure and how we would measure those to ensure that ongoing buy-in. We chose to go with engineering and customer experience metrics instead of the usual ones. So think back to these goals that I shared earlier. We wanted the new experience to feel either the same or it could be better, but definitely couldn't be worse. We also wanted teams to feel pride in their work, to feel like they're setting goals, kicking butt, shipping fast, high-performing, high speed. The first thing we used was sort of a proxy for the customer experience metric. We decided to use largest contentful paint time. Say that quickly 5 times in a row, by the way. It's a real tongue teaser. A good LCP is considered about 2.5 seconds. The old version that we had was an LCP of 3.3 seconds average, and the new one was 1.5 seconds average. The max we tested was 1.9 seconds, so it's all inside the good range, which is great. Then there are a few features that are really heavy and deal with a lot of data, so we instrumented those features separately and tested their performance. Our assumption was, hey, if these heavy features are improved, then we can assume that everything else is improved as well, and we don't need to test the performance of every single page and every single feature. These were the heaviest ones in old self-reflections as well. On the developer experience side of things, our old front-end deploy time was 20 to 40 minutes, and it went down to under 10 minutes. Our old back-end deploy time, brace yourselves, was 40 minutes to an hour, and that went down to under 5 minutes. You can imagine how painful those old deploy times were when we had incidents, and how they may have impacted our mean time to remediation. We also made huge improvements to our adoption of our design systems and accessibility standards. Not a lot to say about this step. Everyone loves a good metric, TLDR. You can go home now. So we were able to show that even though we are building like for like, we are still bringing value to our customers as well as to the teams and to CultureAmp. Anything we can do to ensure that ongoing buy-in is as smooth as possible and that our ongoing demands for the rebuild are just an easy pill to keep swallowing. We did struggle, though, to measure some of these. The old version is not very well instrumented, and it's not the easiest to work with. I also feel like we should have invested more in instrumenting the key trade-off decisions upfront, so that after we had shipped, we could have checked each trade-off decision to make sure that we were on track. This was a hard journey there, but we did it. We shipped the first slice, gained confidence that we knew what we were doing, we were on the right track, had a bit retro, had a celebration, ate some shawarma, whatever. Not too long of a break allowed, unfortunately. We immediately had to pivot to what's next. 1 down, 5 to go. Basically done, am I right? No. We had to take everything we learned from the first slice, pages and pages of learnings and wins and lessons, and turn that into a plan for the remaining 5 slices. What plan? We had absolutely no plan. We had done just enough big picture planning first to get buy-in for the rebuild. Then we got buy-in for the first slice, so we did just enough planning to deliver and ship that first slice. It was great, good metrics, shipped to customers. What now? We needed a plan for the remaining 5 modules, and we needed it yesterday. So remember the opportunity radar that I showed before. We went back to the basics and started from there. First, we extracted from this radar a few potential roadmap items that we could use as examples for planning. It was important to never lose sight of why we're doing this rebuild. You can get lost inside the weeds of a technical rebuild, but it was critical to remember the rebuild needs to unlock opportunities for us, otherwise it's not worth millions of dollars. Then it was time for, you guessed it, more brainstorming. We got a representative group together, and we considered multiple potential architecture options. This time, we were talking about the whole system, not just the first slice. We included key stakeholders, and we discussed pros and cons. Next, we thought of potential team structures. So for the remaining slices, now that we had shipped the first slice, the monolith was frozen, we were free to put all 4 teams on top of the rebuild. How are we going to structure them? We overlaid the team structures on top of the architecture options. Those are the squiggly circles. Yes, I'm not known for my visual design skills. That's as good as it gets, by the way. Then we considered different people's perspectives on what should we optimize for. The idea here was not to generate one list of very important things, but more to kind of bring out those unspoken things that people care about and make sure that we are 80% directionally aligned on what everyone's optimizing for. Finally, we tried to pick an option that made most sense for everything combined. So think of it in layers. The bottom layer was the product roadmap. The layer on top is potential architecture options. And I don't have a third hand, but the layer on top is potential team structures. We needed a plan that worked in a vertical slice that was really good for all of these 3 layers. So fast iteration, good domain ownership, and high performance should be reflected. I present to you the plan. So things that served us well in the planning phase. That overlay method I described before of looking at like roadmap, architecture, and team structure all together was a bit unusual, but it allowed us to discuss trade-offs. Then having clarity on what people are optimizing for told us what position everyone was coming at it from. So everyone had their own area of expertise. No one person was able to kind of see the holistic view, but combining those together meant that we could satisfy the most acceptable set of what everyone wanted to optimize for. Then we set a cultural expectation with the teams to anticipate frequent change as we go through this plan, and say that, hey, we need from you high agility if we're going to make this plan successful. And finally, it is rare at CultureAmp. I've never seen before an entire group of teams focused on just one high priority initiative. So that focus was a gift, and we wanted to leverage that gift as much as possible. I'm going to skip what didn't go well. So the plan looked easy, right? No, it's because I'm running out of time. Now, the plan looked pretty official in that slide, if I may say so myself. But realistically, this is where we are now in April. It does feel like we know what we're doing now. We've like validated a lot of unknown unknowns. We've put 4 teams on it. But let's be real. We're not even halfway through the plan at this stage. Blink and absolutely anything could happen. I'm not going to talk about step 6 today, and it's not because I'm running out of time. It's because we are still executing the rebuild. So step 6 is not actually done yet. I'm not sure how it'll go. If everything goes to shit, then this is how step 6 is going to go. If everything goes to plan, then this is how step 6 is going to go. I guess you're going to have to come back to RubyConf next year to find out exactly how it went. So to summarize, they say that rebuilds are always a bad idea. I disagree. I say that if you have a domain model that cannot take your product forward, if you're stuck with Series A decisions band-aided over and over again to create a big mess, your teams are grinding to a halt, you have tight coupling, you own an underperforming product, but in a huge potential market, and you've tried absolutely everything else, then a rebuild could be a good idea for you. You could do it with steps like this, and you could consider what I shared before, things that went well for us and things that didn't go well for us, the lessons we learned. However, if these conditions are not true for you, then I can't help you. You're on your own, and you've wasted the last half an hour. Just kidding. If these are not true for you, it doesn't mean that a rebuild is not the right thing for you. It just means that you need to think about the steps I shared, the lessons I shared, and you need to think about how you can tweak them for success in your specific situation. But I mean, yeah, like it could also mean that a rebuild is not the right thing for you. I'm not here to sell you on rebuilds. I don't know. I just work here. So thank you for coming to this talk. And if you want to follow up on what didn't work well on step 5, then just find me outside, and I'm happy to tell you. Thank you.